Hello, this is Eric White. In this screencast, I am going to examine how you can remove speaker notes from an OpenXML presentation using the OpenXML SDK. Before embarking on this project, I had a vague idea about how speaker notes are stored, but to be honest, I didn't really know. I'm going to take you on an abbreviated version of the path that I took to discover how speaker notes work and how to write some code to remove speaker notes. This will serve two purposes. First of all, if you simply need to understand how speaker notes work, you will learn that in this screencast. Beyond that, you will also get a sense of how I solve OpenXML developer problems. In other words, how do I research a particular question around the OpenXML markup? The first thing I generally do is I play around with the markup and create some documents or create some presentations and change them and compare them, so on and so forth. In this process, I might go back and forth to the OpenXML standard, looking up particular elements and particular attributes and seeing exactly what their semantics are. First, I'll create a presentation. I'll call it test 1a, open test 1a. Let's add a slide. To start off, I'm not going to add any notes. I want, first of all, a presentation that doesn't contain any notes. Let's save it, close it. Copy it, paste it, rename it. First of all, I'm going to show you some behavior that I observed with PowerPoint. I'm just going to click there and only click there. I'm not actually typing any notes. I'm going to save it and close it. I'll use the OpenXML SDK productivity tool to compare those files. And the first thing you'll notice is that the notes slide got created just by clicking on that notes area. I'll talk about that in just a bit, how that affects the approach that I'm going to take. Microsoft PowerPoint will create those notes parts if you only simply click on that notes area in the slide. And further, when you remove notes, all PowerPoint does is actually remove the contents of those note slides. We'll take a look at that. Now I'm going to actually add some notes. Now I've added those notes. Now before I do a comparison, I'm going to go into PowerPoint and remove those notes. So copy and paste, rename, it's test 1C. File, check for issues, inspect the document, check for presentation notes, remove all presentation notes, and close the document, save it, and close it. Now let's compare test 1B with test 1C. The notes parts have been created for both slides. There are some differences in the app and core. I don't think those differences have anything to do with what we're researching here. Let's look at the differences in one of these note slides. If we drop down here, we can see that the only difference is that the run that is a child of the paragraph under TX body, that run has been removed. Let's look at the other part. We'll see exactly the same. All that's happened when we remove those notes is that the contents of that paragraph have been removed. The actual paragraph itself is still there. Let's delete test 1C, and I'm going to go into test 1B. I'm going to add multiple paragraphs to this note. Let's add another paragraph to this note too. Now copy test 1B, rename it test 1C, open test 1C, remove the presentation notes, close it, save it, close the presentation. Let's compare test 1B and test 1C again. Let's look at the difference in the note slide. And this is more or less what we expected to see also, is that the contents of the first paragraph were removed, but the paragraph remains there, and subsequent paragraphs are removed when you clear the notes. This is the behavior that PowerPoint takes, so I think that's a perfectly adequate behavior to emulate in the code that we're going to write to remove notes from a presentation. The next thing I'm going to explain are the various shapes that we see in the notes part. I'll drag test1b.pptx and drop it onto Visual Studio. Just to review the relationships here, we can see that the presentation has a relationship to two slides. There's slide 1 and there's slide 2. We can see that each of these slides have a relationship to a note slide. We can also see that the note slide has a relationship back to the slide. We don't really care that much about those relationships, given our strategy is that we're just going to remove the content of those paragraphs. Let's look at the note slide. I'm going to format the XML. By the way, if you're not familiar with the Visual Studio Power Tool that enables you to edit OpenXML documents directly in Visual Studio, you can find more information about it here. In this particular case, I think it's going to be easier to explain the markup if I have this presentation open both in Visual Studio and in the OpenXML SDK productivity tool. I'll open test 1B. There's the presentation. There's slide 1. From there we can get to the notes part. There's the notes root element. One of the things that's sometimes educational is to examine the OpenXML SDK 2.0 strongly typed object model in relationship to the markup. So we can see that this p:\notes element is the notes slide. We can see that this p:\CSLD is common slide data. The p:\SP tree is the shape tree. Under there we can see that there are various non-visual properties and group shape properties. We're not so interested in those at this particular time. What we are interested in, though, are these three shapes down here. Let's look at the markup in Visual Studio. Here is the common slide data. There is the shape tree. Here are the various visual and non-visual properties. I'll collapse those. We don't really care about those. And here we can see the three shapes. 1, 2, and 3. The question is, how do we decide which one of these shapes has the text that we need to delete to remove notes from this presentation? Certainly we can look down here and we can see the text. This is another paragraph, and so this is obviously the shape that contains the text that we want to remove from this presentation. By the way, we could just do a little experiment here. We can come into this paragraph, delete that, delete all of those. Here I'll change that A:\P/ and delete that line. So now we have just a paragraph in there. Now if we save it and open test 1B, we can see down here that PowerPoint again puts this placeholder text, click to add notes here. So PowerPoint does understand those changes to mean that that slide has no notes. So this is the shape right here that we want to modify. How do we decide that that is the shape that we want to modify? Well, the first thing that pops out at me is this non-visual property with this pH element and the type equal body. That looks suspiciously like something I might want to be concerned about. If I look at the shape above that, I see that there's the non-visual properties and the pH element with the type equals slide image. And that probably isn't what I'm looking for. Here I can see also on this particular shape there's the non-visual properties with this pH element and the type is slide num, and that's probably also not what I'm looking for. So I want to do a little bit of research in the OpenXML standard and make sure that this non-visual property with this pH element with type equal body, if that's something that I can trigger off of to figure out which shape contains the TX body that contains the paragraphs that I want to either remove content from or to remove the paragraphs themselves in the case of a multi-paragraph note. Let's open up the OpenXML standard, come down to Presentation ML Reference Material. First of all, I find this NV-SBPR. This is in section 19.3.1.34. This is the non-visual properties for a shape. The child that we're interested in is NVPR. If we come down here, NVPR is non-visual properties. Come down to that. The child we're interested in is this pH element. This pH element is placeholder shape. Let's go take a look at that. Indicates that when a shape is considered a placeholder by the generating application, it can have special properties to alert the user that they can enter content into the shape. Different placeholder types are allowed and can be specified by using the placeholder type attribute for this element. That seems pretty much like what I want. And here's the type attribute. Let's go look at section 19.7.10. It's an enumeration value. The one that we're interested in is this first one, body. It contains body text allowed for slide, slide layout, slide master, notes, note master. If this enumeration is set to the value of body, then it contains body text. And the body text specifically is what we want to remove from the notes. So let's take a look at some example code. The code first opens up the document. It opens it up for writing. This true indicates that the code can write to the document or write to the presentation in this particular case. The code then iterates through all the slide parts for the presentation. It gets the notes slide part from the slide, and if that notes value is not null, then that means there is at least a notes part. We may or may not find out that there are notes in that slide, but at least we know there is a notes part. This query here finds the first shape that has that placeholder value with a type equal to body. If it did find a shape, then it navigates to the text body. If the text body is not null, it gets the first paragraph. If the first paragraph is not null, it gets a list of the subsequent paragraphs. And you'll notice here that I'm very explicitly, first of all, skipping the first paragraph and materializing this collection into a list. I don't want it to remain an IEnumerable that is going to be evaluated lazily. Once you start modifying the tree, you don't want to be doing anything lazily. That's just a general rule. And then finally we get down here to the actual guts of the method, which is that it first removes all children of the first paragraph and it removes all subsequent paragraphs. And that's all there is to the code. Let's go test it out. Let's go back into test 1B. Add a couple of paragraphs to that note. We still have notes for the second slide. Let's add a new slide. We won't add any notes for that slide. Close it, copy test 1B, paste it into the bin directory, go back to the example, and I'll change the example to use test1b.pptx, save it. Before I run the example, I am going to make a copy of it. I'll call this test1a. At this point in time, they both have speaker notes in them. We'll run the example, which will remove the speaker notes from test1b. Let's open up test1b. The first slide has no notes, the second slide has no notes, and the third slide didn't have any notes and still does not have any notes. Well, that's all there is to it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.